happens.
And it's there. You're live.
Awesome.
Uh-huh. You're welcome.
Did it work?
Yeah. All it takes is somebody under 30. What was her name? Yeah. I'll thank her. Hello. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. This is a wonderful turnout for this discussion tonight. A couple of housekeeping things. You may have saw when you came in, there's some pamphlets in the back that have information about the group and the leaders and their contact information and worship times and things like that. If you want to ask a question tonight but aren't comfortable coming up to the mic later when we do the Q&A, there are cards in the back and you can turn in cards and we can ask those questions for you if you'd like. Tonight, for the first time, we are streaming this on Facebook, which is super exciting because we are Luddites. But luckily, Maggie was here, and she is a millennial, so she was able to figure it out for us. So anyway, if you have never been to Exploring the Sacred Again, we've been doing this for about 15 years, meeting with various religious leaders in Steamboat, to have these conversations about different topics, sometimes on things that are happening in our community or our society. Sometimes they're more philosophical or theological questions. Tonight we're going deep with the philosophical question of the purpose of life. But before we get into that, I'd like each leader just to introduce yourself and your affiliation.
I'm Tim Selby from Hardy Steamboat United Methodist Church.
I'm Tim Olmsted from the Buddhist community.
I'm Larry Klingman from Harmish Pachad, the Jewish community of Steamboat.
I'm Ernest Bear from Holy Name Catholic Church.
I'm Steve Egner from the Muslim community.
And I'm Karen Post, and I lead the local Course in Miracles study group.
And I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Marshall McCarthy, and helped found the organization. I usually do this with my husband, Tim, but he's out of town tonight. Can everybody hear okay? Is this volume good? Great, all right. So our topic tonight is the purpose of life, and we know this is a pretty lofty topic, but we didn't want it to be just a philosophical question. As we started to talk about the purpose of life and what that means, we realized that our view on that really motivates how we live each day. If we have a clear view of, like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What is this whole thing about? It can really be a guide in our lives. So we felt like this was an important topic to bring to all of you. And if you haven't been to one of these before, we'll keep the discussion with the panel for the first half, and then we'll open it up to all of you for your questions and comments for the second half. So again, thanks for coming. And we'll just start with that first question of, basically, now that we are here, now that we're on earth here, how do we understand what our purpose in this life is? And maybe I'll call you out, Tim Selby, to start.
What? Oh, okay. I think the question is a good one. I think it's always amusing to me how we act like, so often we act like that's a question that we can't answer, or like, oh, how would we know? You know, even I joked about it this week, said, you know, I'm coming here tonight, we got to talk about the purpose of life, so if you know anything about that, let me know. Nobody said anything to me, by the way. But that really, I think we know a whole lot about that question. I think in this room right now, there's a whole lot of purpose, a whole lot of meaning. I don't think we just kind of float around in life aimlessly, meaninglessly, without purpose. I think we have a whole lot of that. So I think the question gets difficult to answer if we think about like some external, you know, meaning to all things. Why is there life? Why is there a universe? Why is there any of that? I don't pay a lot of, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about those things because we don't know. But I think the more fundamental question is, what is the purpose of your life? What is your purpose? What is your as a Christian person, my tradition helps me to shape and form what's meaningful and what's purposeful. As a Christian person, Jesus' greatest commandment, very clearly, was love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as you love yourself. To love and be loved is to me, really the deepest purpose of life. Now, there's all kinds of levels that we live that out on. I live that out in my work. I live that out as a dad, as a husband, as a friend, as a colleague. I have 2 dogs. Try to live it out with them. Try to love them and be loved by them. On all these levels, we're trying to do that. At the end of the day, if on my last day or with my last breath, I can feel like, man, I really loved and was loved, that's a good life. Thanks for calling me first. I know where you live.
So do others of you agree? Do you agree with that? That it's just about loving God, loving others? Is that the premise?
Well, it's really interesting from A Course in Miracles point, and the miraculous is any time we're completely connected with another person, when we drop our egos and we are coming from that place of love. Then in that place, anything can happen, and we should work there. What's interesting from the Course in Miracles point of view is that it definitely agrees that that was Jesus' message. But he said the problem is so many of us don't trust God. We either don't believe in God, we don't believe that God's going to take care of us or rescue us. So the Course says, yes, Jesus' message was love God and love your brother like yourself. The Course says, okay, you might need to work towards loving God, to trusting that. So just really focus on loving your brother like yourself. And from that, you will understand the love of God.
I'm Steve Egner, and I became a Muslim when I was about 29. I was first interested in Sufism, and that led me to believe in the mystical aspect of Islam. What I wanted in life was to understand and develop a relationship with God. And to do that, one of the first things I learned was that each of us has the presence of God within us. And that to develop that relationship, we have to restrict and resist bad qualities, bad behaviors, ego, desires, things like that. And then we would be capable of being one with God, with not only loving God, but if we choose to behave as God would want us to behave, then we would become one with God. One of the first book titles I saw that drew me on the path I'm on was called Divine Luminous Wisdom, Man, God, God, Man. And I began to then realize the presence of God is within each of us. If we try and seek to develop that inner relationship, it shapes all of our behaviors. We hold ourselves accountable, and we should hold ourselves accountable for all of the behaviors, the positive behaviors, and the mistakes we make, and try to correct those throughout our life. And that's what we do every day.
Can I add on to my answer? I wanted to play with your question for 1 second, because I think it's a fundamental thing. When you ask if you agree or disagree, when I share about that, or Karen does, any of us do, we're sharing about our purpose, our meaning. I don't feel like anybody gets to disagree with me, right? That's my thing, right? And so I think one of the things that happens between faiths is when we want to take our thing, our experience, our belief, our meaning, our purpose, and lay that over on everybody else, now we have conflict. But to hear each other, to hear where we're coming from, to understand another person, I think that's fundamental.
And that kind of leads to the next question too, which is who gets to decide what the purpose is? Is this something that's given to you by God or your religion or your community or your family, or do each of us get to make that up? And then my next question might be, what's the consequence of that if we do get to each make that up?
I want to jump back to the first question for just a moment. In Judaism, God has instructed the Jews to follow what he is telling them to do. But if you look through the Hebrew Bible, most of those instructions deal with how you deal with other people, how you deal with your fellow man. The emphasis was never on if you praise me, if you love me, if you worship me, things will be much better. The emphasis was always on how are you going to treat the people that you're living with? How are you going to behave with them? That seemed to be a lot more important, which I think leads into the next thing, our next question, which is where does our purpose, if there is a purpose, come from? Is it coming from some spiritual, from God? Is it coming from our parents because we're living with them and they're laying down their lives and you're seeing what they're doing? Is it coming from our relationships with other people? This whole thing of purpose is a very interesting thing. I want to add one last thing. I had a cousin who was very old and very ill. And in our family, we also had someone who was very depressed and very suicidal. And I asked him for advice. I said, what do we do? And he said, well, this particular person needed a purpose. And I thought, wow, he needed to have a reason, a purpose, something, and he had lost that. And that was leading, I think, to much of his depression. And I think that, I think having a purpose is very important. Where it comes from, I have a lot of questions about that.
Actually, maybe Tim, since I think so far we've heard about this coming from God, I'd love to hear from a non-theistic
Directly
Tim.
So, interestingly enough, in the Buddhist tradition, one of the key contemplations that is sort of the basis for how we approach our life is that we regard this life as what we call a precious human life. It's considered to be extremely rare. For instance, if you just go out and pick up a rock and see how many beings are born in the form of an insect or something like that, to have the freedom to think about these things, the safety, the health, the brain power, the community, the teachings themselves, we say is, in the classic analogy, it's as rare as if a fisherman on the sea, threw a life ring out into the ocean, and once every 100 years, a blind turtle came to the ocean, to the surface. And it's as rare to have a human life as for that tortoise to put his head through that life ring. So we take this life, so that's an injunction to really make the most of this life. As a Buddhist, we wouldn't suggest, as Tim was saying, that there's anybody who's designing a purpose. As a non-theistic tradition, we don't believe that there's someone watching over us or keeping score or something like that. But we do sense, I feel really deeply that everybody imagines or intuits that there's a possibility of having a life that is less constrained, less cut off, less small, more open, more spacious, more connected, more grounded, more involved. There's just something, everybody has this sort of innate, very intelligent longing to complete themselves. And so, however they do that, with whatever methods or whatever tradition or whatever philosophy, I think we go out and find something that accords with our basic inclinations. And so instead of there being a purpose, there's an opportunity. We have an opportunity in this lifetime, once and for all, to resolve that longing. And then that, we would say, is the journey of our life.
Karen, did you want to share?
So as far as where this comes from my experience and from the Course, it's when Steve was talking about ego. The Course uses the word ego, but what it's talking about is a false sense of self. Somebody you have learned to be, your defense mechanisms and the like. And that actually cuts you off from your inner experience of who you are. It's that person we knew as a child that doesn't seem to ever age. That's why we look in the mirror and we don't feel the age that we look like. And that is our authentic self. And we cover it up with our fears and our sense of scarcity, and we try to manage life. And so that our sense of purpose comes from that authentic self. It is a voice and a calling that is always there, but it takes trust to give up the workings of the world, the fighting, to survive, and sort of relax into that. You might call it the flow, and that defines it. It isn't so. It comes through you, but it isn't made up from you. It's not your own ego. So it's not each one of us has our own truth. The truth is there. We have to learn how to fall back and listen to it. And so again, that's where the miraculous comes from, as we let go of the false self and we start to feel from that inner direction.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from you, Ernest, since we haven't yet tonight. Do you feel like our purpose is predetermined by God? Do we decide this for ourselves?
So the Christian tradition is rooted in the Jewish tradition, and in the creation story, God is not equal to nature. God is outside of nature. God creates nature. So we believe we're created, and because we're created, the one who created us had a plan for us, had some sort of a design, some sort of reason or purpose for that creation. And I was just talking to Steve before, if we were to think that we could all just make up our own purpose and meaning, whatever, it's almost like we're all a whole bunch of different species just all doing our own thing. But from our perspective of faith, in a design, an intelligent designer, a person outside of us who created us with a certain purpose. And I totally agree with Tim, what he was saying about to love and to be loved. That seems to be a fundamental thing. I suppose you probably would agree with that to some extent, that there's this feeling like, yeah, this is what I was made for. I was made to love and to be loved. Another way of putting it, I would say, go from self-absorption to self-donation. And if we look at Jesus Christ, he donated himself, he gave his life away out of love. And he said, greater love has no one than to lay down his life for his friends. So that's an expression of love. It goes beyond romance, it goes beyond feeling good, it goes beyond, I would do anything for you because I love you and I want to help you and I would lay down my life for you. That idea. And so there's a line, and I think it's in Vatican II, which was a text that was written by Pope John Paul II, that said, Jesus reveals humanity to itself. He reveals our fullest identity to ourselves. That is to love, to be loved, to be willing to give of ourselves for other people. But yeah, we believe that there is a purpose. And when we find that, it feels right. It just feels right. Yeah, this is the meaning, this is the purpose. I really love you and I want to do whatever I can for you. And even if I lose everything, it just feels like I did the right thing, because that's the way we're hardwired, or whatever. That's the way we're designed.
So I have a question for you, Ernest. You say we can't make up the meaning of our life, but
well, you can, but there's something bigger, or broader, or more general that we all have in common. I mean, you could make up a meaning, but it may not be the ultimate meaning,
But everybody is going to make up meaning. Mm-hmm. They're going to make it up. It's just a natural inclination to make a story about their life. Hopefully, it's a wholesome and a visionary story. But I mean, it would seem to me that for all the people who don't go to a Christian church on Sunday, they're aligning with some other meaning. Mm-hmm. So in essence, in many ways, it seems like we really are all making it up. Then we're gathering with people who are aligned with the same story that someone made up. I mean, I don't. Yeah, does that make sense?
That's the reality in our world. Yeah, I would say for sure.
Yeah.
So you hang out with the people that you share the meaning with. Yeah, you share values with. Sociologically, that's the truth, right?
So from a church point of view or a spiritual point of view, our hope would be that the meaning that they're carrying together is an exalted meaning or is a egalitarian meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And we would say that comes from another source, not just we all happen to agree. But the reason we agree is because that desire was placed in us from another source.
So it seems like you're saying there is an ultimate purpose that everyone has, sort of regardless of what religion they are. And are you guys on the same page with that, or does it feel like, again, that I know Tim earlier, you had said each
it seems to me that there's an ultimate inclination, or there's a common inclination. You know, like that a flower is inclined to grow towards the sun. I'm not sure that that's dictated by the sun, but it seems to be that what flowers do.
It's dictated by the genetics of the flower. And where did that come from?
If you want to. Yeah, I think it's a little more lyrical than that. That's fine.
There's an issue that's a little bit problematic for me, and that is, I think in general we all want to do good. But some people feel like they're doing good if they have a rifle and they're killing someone else. Some people feel like they're doing good if they're rushing up to that wounded person and saving them. And that's really difficult for me. And that gets back to this whole thing of God giving us choices, letting us make choices. And so one can say, your purpose is influenced heavily by God, but it's also influenced heavily by daily life, by the people, by what you're doing, by what you're coming into, and what your definition of good is, what your definition of bad is. And that's problematic. That's very problematic for me.
Did you want to respond to Larry?
It is problematic.
It's particularly problematic when we do that in the name, in the defense of what we think is the ultimate purpose. Then it's so. I mean, that's the problem. The ultimate purpose, at the end of the day, is going to be defined by us. Even if it's simply how we read someone else's defining ultimate purpose. So I mean, that again. I mean, I don't mean to make a hard differentiation, but it seems to me that if people really, if there's a deep, not a deep, I don't like to use that word, but a sort of intuitive connection with one's own heart, fundamentally, that fundamentally we know as badly as we want to be liked, accepted, heard, understood, and safe, intuitively we understand that about the other. So the golden rule actually comes from inside out, as a natural, intuitive understanding of who we are. And therefore it would be unthinkable to treat other people in a way that we couldn't bear to be treated.
I think that connects with what Karen was talking about, the true self versus the false self. And I could be a serial killer and think that's I'm being true to myself, but it's not my truest self. I'm somehow deviated or perverted in some way to think that this is really going to bring me happiness. In the end, it's not going to bring me peace and happiness because it's not my true self.
And this is what I like about Islam, because every day we get on our knees and ask God to forgive us. Every day we pray. Every day we're thinking about, what mistakes did I make? Did I put my ego over someone else's? Or did I listen to my conscience? And that's the point. For me, one reason why I became a Muslim and left Christianity was that I learned early on in the process that I need to be doing this stuff every day. I need to hold myself accountable every day for my thoughts, my intentions, and who I am surrendering to. Is it divine? Is it better than average? What am I doing, and how do I hold myself accountable? In that respect, therefore, every day when I go to bed, I look over my mistakes during the day, my analysis during the day, and that's why I love God, and that's why I hope God loves me. But I have to keep doing this every day.
So this is where I would see it differently, because the Course doesn't talk about God as being outside of us. And so it wouldn't be a message coming from outside. And so there's a criteria to know that difference between that false self and that authentic self. And that is, it's not the decision itself. It's not the behavior itself. It's the motivation behind it. And there is going to be the authentic, the touchstone. And that is, if you are motivated from fear, if you would, again, if you would do any kind of harm to another, because if God isn't outside of us, if God is all and we are part of that, whether you call it God or not, if that is our authentic self and we're connected to everybody else, the Course uses the analogy, would really one of your hands want to stab the other? I mean, if you do any injury to any part of the whole body, you're injuring yourself, and it would make absolutely no sense. So you would never act out of fear, and you would never act in a way that would cause fear in anybody else, because fear is like an infection, and you wouldn't want to infect anybody else or act in a way that would bring that infection. So it's not looking outside, am I doing good deeds? So the Course says you can't really understand how to be in the world until you've really worked on yourself and removed your own internal conflict. Because if you're still conflicted, in fact, the Course says the idea of fighting for peace is crazy. Because how can you fight for peace? If you're not at peace, you will never be part of generating peace. So the very first place we have to work is within ourselves and take 100% responsibility for where we are and how we act.
So this brings us to our next question, which is, as we start to pursue this purpose, a lot of you talked about the golden rule and love each other as you love yourself. So is pursuing our purpose more external, like in acts of kindness and love and giving to others and helping the poor and that kind of thing? Or as Karen just said, do we actually need to do the internal work first about knowing our true nature, connecting with God, however you would define that? Do you see it? How do you balance those two? Is it both? Is it one or the other? Is it one first, then the next?
I think the most important aspect of looking at choices we have is to form the intention always to do the right thing. So one has to have an internal dialogue with your soul and with your what's going through your mind, and decide before you take action to choose the intention that most honors the soul of another person as well as your own. So you always choose to intend properly in alignment with what you're ultimately going to be held accountable for. So that's how I answer the question.
Okay.
I'd go like maybe in a little different direction in that I'm kind of simple-minded, and so I think so often in religions we end up with, like, there's so many things we have to do and we have to accomplish, and I get like, oh my gosh, I can't, maybe sometimes we miss the reality that just being alive, maybe that just is the thing. There's not something you have to do. One of my favorite theologians is the great Rabbi Abraham Heschel. One of his great lines was, just to be is a blessing. Just to live is holy. Like, we're all in a room tonight, living, breathing together on planet Earth, floating around. Like, it's amazing. Like, do we really have to go out and do stuff now? Like, can our being be enough? We've been talking lately in our church a little bit about the creatures. Maybe you saw a bird today. It's just a bird. It just does its stuff. It tries to eat, and it doesn't have to make its mark on the world. It doesn't have to accomplish something. It just is a bird, and it just is. And then it dies, and that's enough, and that's a beautiful thing. And I wanted to ask you, like, we've talked a lot about this. In the Christian tradition, we're pretty like gung ho about we got to do all kinds of stuff. You guys are a little better at being than we are. kind of settling in a little bit. Does that resonate? Can being be enough, or do we have to do stuff?
Yeah, I mean, actually depending on which tradition of Buddhism and which sub-tradition we look at, it will read that completely differently. So it seems like there are very, very clear guidelines of what to do and what not to do that guide us and inspire us until the point at which there's a natural sense of being. And those guidelines become innate and completely obvious. And at that point, being really is the issue. And in some traditions, my tradition particularly that I come from, they come from more the ground up, which is the sense of being naturally informs in a completely wholesome and connected and positive way everything that we do, just arising from that sense of being. Others are more conduct oriented, particularly the early teachings of the Buddha. It basically says, do this and don't do that, so you don't screw things up, so you don't make it worse for yourself, so you don't just sort of pile on, and then hopefully get back to being. So we go top down, bottom up. Yeah, both ways.
I'd like to ask a question of you, Tim, as well. Olmsted, based on this question of should it come from the inside or does it come from the outside, the motivation? Namaste, can you define that for me? I've heard something, but I want to make sure I get it right. The phrase namaste, it's Buddhist, right? Is it? Or is it Hindu or what?
Yeah, it's Hindu.
What does it mean in your mind, as you understand it? I mean, I was told that it means the God in me meets the God in you, or greets the God in you, or reverences the God in you. Does that ring true?
I have no idea.
You don't know? Okay.
I lived in Nepal for 12 years. I said namaste 10 billion times.
Did?
I have no idea what it
Really? Is it like hello?
That sounds nice.
It's like hello, goodbye.
Yeah.
Like shalom.
Yeah, it's just hello.
Shalom.
Yeah. What the derivation of it? That might
You're not
be
sure.
serious, but
Oh,
if you
okay.
ask a Nepali, they would have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, then I won't make the connection. But I think in the Christian tradition, Jesus said in one of his parables in Matthew that whatever you do to least of my brothers, you do to me, which implies that God or Jesus resides in other people as well as wherever else he might be, that God dwells in the person around you. And so I would like to say that it's both internal and external. Like I can go and pray in my little chapel or in my room and say, Lord, I want to be with you. I want to love you. Help me be my true self. Forgive me of my sins. Make me more loving. I can pray that. And I can also go out and love my neighbor and help the homeless or whatever. And both of those are really very similar activities. I'm loving God privately and I'm loving God horizontally, vertically and horizontally. So I think they both flow in and out of each other. My relationship with the God of love inspires me to love my neighbor. And when I love my neighbor, I encounter the God of love, which brings me closer to the God of love. So they just both, it's like a circle or a cycle.
Yes.
So the next question is, what motivates us or you to fulfill your purpose? Is it the promise of a reward, like going to heaven? Is it the fear of something bad happening, whether that's hell or a reincarnation? Is it an innate motivation? What propels us towards our purpose?
So, yeah, if you said, like, I'm a Christian, right? So if you said, like, none of it's true, it's just a story, and when you die, you're just dead, and that's just it. I still want to live exactly the same way I'm trying to live now. Because I found the path of Jesus very compelling, and that it helps me to live in the deepest way that I know how to do that. To be the most fully alive, to be life-giving to other people, to hopefully share some good that way. If at the end of the day there's nothing behind the door, okay, I still want to live exactly that way. Sometimes people say, well, if there's no heaven or hell, then it doesn't make any difference. You do whatever you want. Maybe for you, but if there's nothing behind the door, guess what I want? I want to live in exactly the same way Jesus taught us how to live, because I find that to be the most fulfilling and the most beneficial to the best way I can bring life to the people around me at the same time.
So finally, I'm going to sort of quote a Sufi saint, but it's one of my favorite things, and he said, God, if I act for the reward of heaven, please bar the doors of heaven to me. And if I act out of the fear of hell, then please throw me in the deepest pit. Let me act now out of love and have no other reward than the love of you. And really being in that moment and not looking for reward or looking for, avoiding punishment becomes, the clearest thing. I think you said it earlier, that you just feel right when you're doing the right thing, and that's where we're living in the now, because that's the only time we make a decision. Otherwise, we're just lost in another sort of false egoic sense of, am I going to get a reward or am I going to be punished?
In the Jewish tradition, there is no, there's not a strong belief in an afterlife. There's a belief in the Messiah. It's a messianic religion. And Jews love to tell stories, so I'm going to tell a story. The rabbis love to tell stories, and I was raised in a very, very orthodox, not my family setting, but my teaching was from a very, very orthodox perspective, very much to the right. And I remember the rabbi telling us many stories, and one of the stories he told me was about a man who, there was a village, there always in a village somewhere in Poland or something. This is a very Ashkenazi, not Sephardic. Ashkenazi were the Eastern Jews. So there was a man who was very, very wealthy, and he gave to the synagogue. He contributed the Torah. He was extra scrolls. He did decorations. He was a very wealthy man, and he did very well. And there was another man who collected garbage, and he was very, very poor. He would go around the streets and collect garbage, and then he would go through it, and he would try to sell it to people, and he lived a very, very meager life. And they both died the same day. And they both go to heaven, or they go somewhere. Somewhere good. And of course, the gentleman who had this wealth and given all these things, he wanted to go into heaven. So there was a scale, and he gets on the scale, and on one side are all these contributions that he's made, all this gold, everything that he's ever done, and he's on the other side. And the side he's on goes down. So he doesn't get in. And then this poor schlub comes along, and he says, well, if that guy with all that couldn't get in, how do I have a chance here? So they put him on one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale, they put his cart, they put the horse, they put all the junk he had picked up in his life. All this stuff was on the other scale. And his side went down. So he was going in to whatever that thing was. So one might say that he was a righteous man and he did the right thing. And I think that you mentioned doing the right thing, and that was a very strong feeling that I have, that there's you're not told what to do, you do the right thing. The question that has always bothered me is, how do we learn what the right thing is? Where does that come from? Does that come from inside? Does it come from outside? Does it come from watching people around us and seeing what they're doing? Or is there some divine spirit that has said, this is the right thing? It's a question that I pondered.
I think we could tend to get a little overly religious about all this.
That was pretty
Actually, I think, for me very personally, but my guess it would be that if we actually, at night when we pull the covers up and we turn the lights off and we really think deeply, until we feel that kind of connection, however it manifests, until we discover whatever is there in our heart, in our being, in the world, with others, until we discover that everything that we do is fundamentally a little screwed up. Where there's always some kind of dis-ease, anxiety, frustration, fear, however subtle. And so I think that in my personal experience, my entire journey was based on that, anxiety and pain, and knowing that I had to do something different. And then on the other side, I was very lucky. It's a kind of carrot and stick thing. The stick is that you can't sit still because it doesn't work. And the carrot is, I was lucky enough, and everyone I think has this experience of meeting some people who were so wonderful that I just figured whatever they were doing, whatever they're smoking, I want that. And so there was a strong carrot. So it's a little bit of both, but I think everybody is a little bit like that. Yeah.
So the last question is, how do we know that we have achieved our purpose? What would the markers or the signs be? How do we know? How do we track progress on this path?
Don't look at me.
I've been asking that of this group for 15 years.
Before he answers that, I want to make that last question made hell come to my mind. Interesting. There's virtually no one that believes in hell that thinks that they're going. Right? So,
Excuse me, we're already here.
here we go. So hell is always for other people. That says something about it. I think a belief in hell right there.
I think just to get to the quick answer, peace, joy, serenity, calm, like someone Tim was saying, you go to bed at night and you just feel connected, you feel harmony. I think those are some of the signs. And just a bit of a connection to the previous question. The kingdom of God is not just up there, pie in the sky when you die, but it infiltrates our world. Jesus said the kingdom of God is at hand. And so when we're living in the right way, according to our purpose, we sense the kingdom, we sense a reality that the way it was meant to be, let's say, a place of love and peace and joy and harmony and cooperation and mutual support, as opposed to all of their opposites. We feel peace.
And I went through, and I think, that we're pretty tough on ourselves, right? Like, most of us, wouldn't be like, yeah, I've got it, I'm doing it, right? We're kind of tough on ourselves. We talked about that thing that when you lay down in bed and the things that haunt you and trouble you and all that kind of thing. So that might, to answer that question, might make more of that. Like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not being enough. I think maybe other people are the ones who could more appropriately answer that question. I could look at Tim's next to me or anybody and be like, yeah, he's doing it really well. He probably wouldn't, say that of himself, right? But you can see that. In the Christian tradition, we have it's called the fruit of the Spirit: peace, patience, love, kindness, gentleness. Are those things evident in you? Other people can kind of look at you and say, yeah, like, good job, Most of the time, I don't know, maybe you're not like me, but I spend most of the time beating myself up for what I'm getting wrong.
What's the fruit of the Spirit? That's beautiful.
Peace, patience, kindness, meekness, gentleness, self-control.
What are these things, Jim?
The Methodist is quoting scripture.
Go for it. We're bringing the heat now.
So, I think exactly, that is so beautiful. I remember you quoted that once years ago here. It was so beautiful, so inspiring. So I think that for oneself, that's the experience. And then in relationship to the world, that translates as a burning desire to help others experience what you're experiencing. And without that, it suggests that this is bankrupt. I remember talking to my late teacher once, and we were at the top of his hermitage, and 3 stories down there was a number of nuns playing in the grass. And I was asking him about, how do you know that you're enlightened? It's basically the same question. And he said, if someone says they're enlightened and they look out a window like that and they see those little girls down there and they don't desperately want for them to be happy and at peace, that person is lying to you. He's not enlightened. That's the sign. Just like heat is the sign of fire. That yearning for others to experience yourself is a sign that it's authentic.
I would say it's when that false self has burned away. It's sort of I think the Christians say, when you die to yourself. And from the Course's point of view, that's our perceptual self. When we stop perceiving life and we actually see life, when we stop perceiving each other and running it through our own filter, psychology, cognitive psychology states that we only have emotional reactions to perceptions, to interpretations. And when we just see with eyes that see what is, without judging, without evaluating, without comparing, whether it's us to others or others, then we live at a true sense of peace that can never be disturbed because reality stays consistent. It doesn't change with our mood, with our perceptions, and thus we'll know peace.
In Sufism, we often say to ourselves, or talk about the issue of dying, and for a person to reach what Karen just described means that we die before death. That which separates us and is built on ego and built on what I think is right and what other people are doing. That kind of assessment, that kind of consciousness needs to pass away so that you feel like you're in the presence of God and you're not constantly bringing up issues to yourself that are expressing your ego or what you think is the sense of your life. Because all in all, we need to totally transcend that sense of the person and become one with God. And that's the purpose of our life.
So at this time, we'd like to open it up to questions. And we always ask that you keep it on this topic. If you have questions about other things, feel free to come up to the leaders afterwards. They'll stick around to ask questions. But please keep it on topic. And if you have asked questions before, maybe just pause for a minute and see if there's any new people that want to come up and ask a question. And if you are too shy to ask a question out loud, again, feel free to fill out a card in the back. And I don't know if Joanne is still here. Joanne, you can give them to Joanne. Okay, thanks.
We've answered everybody's questions.
They're stunning.
It's always tough to be the first one.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Thank you. My name is Cash Globe. I grew up here in Steamboat, so I'm sure some of you know my parents. So I wanted to ask you guys about your thoughts on suffering. I've looked a lot into the Buddhist idea that life is suffering, one of the Four Noble Truths. So I just wanted to get every leader's view on suffering, because clearly suffering is part of life. It's just part of the whole cycle. So yeah, just everyone's kind of view on that, and if it's necessary, if it's a necessary part of life, or if we can find ways to ease or even free ourselves from suffering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So a little bit that goes with what I was saying previously, that suffering comes as a product of having an ego or a false self. Suffering is the result of perception or interpretation, because even happiness comes from that. If things go the way we want, we feel happy. If they don't go the way we want, we're going to feel anger or